Hello everyone and welcome to this channel. This is my first ever video, so I'll try not to mess it up too badly. On this channel, I'll be discussing different coding related topics with a focus on the JavaScript ecosystem. And to kick it off, I'll be doing a tutorial on how to create a swipe to delete feature in React Native. I really like the WhatsApp implementation, so I'll be using this as a design. So let's have a look at what the finished product is going to look like. We have a list of items and you can swipe from the right to the left. And once you swipe past a certain threshold, the delete button is extended to the full width of the row, indicating that an important action is about to take place. We're giving the user a chance to cancel the action by swiping a little bit backwards, where the delete button contracts to its initial width, and then if we decide to release the gesture, the row will be deleted and animated to disappear, and yeah, looks pretty smooth. Let's see how we can implement this sort of feature. I'm going to assume that you already have a React Native environment set up. So let's go ahead and create a new React Native project. We're going to run the React Native init command, name our project swipe to delete, and go into our project folder and start our Metro bundler and our iOS simulator or Android emulator, depending on what you're using. I'll be using only on iOS simulator for this example, just to keep my machine from overloading and just for simplicity's sake, but the example should work for both operating systems. So we're going to run the npx react native run iOS command. We'll be using a third-party library called React Native Swipe List View as the building block for this feature, in conjunction with React Native's animated API, to give us more granular control over our animations. So let's go ahead and go to the package page to see how we can install the package and have a look at the documentation to run a basic example of it. Alright, so here we can see the npm install command. We're going to go back to VS Code and run this command. We're also going to link the library with the npx pod install command. First, let's import our library. We're just going to copy and paste this into our app.js file. So we're going to import the library right at the top, and then we're going to import our main swipe list view component, which is going to help us create a swipeable list. Wrap it here inside a view component. So let's have a look at the props that this component accepts. Those are the required ones, and we'll be adding additional optional ones. There is a data prop which just accepts a list of items. We're going to generate some dummy data shortly. We also have render item and render hidden item props, which both take a function which accepts two arguments. The first one is the data that we passed here earlier, and the second one is row map, which is simply an object that holds a reference to each row and gives us access to some useful methods such as close row, which can help us programmatically close a row shut. Those two functions return some JSX, which is used to render the content on the front row, which is the visible part of the swipe list, and the hidden row, which is the row revealed when the user swipes the front row to the left or to the right, and contains our action buttons, which in our example is the delete button. We also have the left open value and the right open value, which is simply the translate X value to which the front row is shifted when the user swipes to the left or to the right, and remains open at that value until the user decides to actually close the row. So we're going to go ahead and create some dummy data. we're going to save this data in a piece of state. So we need to import our useState hook. As you can see, I'm using functional components, so we'll be making use of hooks. So we're going to initialize a new piece of state called list with the setListSetter function. And we're going to pass an array to that list. I'm going to create that array with the array constructor and generate 20 items for that list. We're going to use the spread syntax to copy all of these items, and then we're going to map over each item and return an object for each item with a key property, which is going to be set to the index value of this item. We're going to use string interpolation with backticks here to convert the integer to a string, and we're going to add some text, something along the lines of this is item number and then the index value. So now we're going to pass our list to the data prop, and we're going to abstract all the render item and render hidden item logic into separate functions just for readability. So we're going to create a function called render item, which is going to accept a data and raw map prop, and it's going to return a component called visible item, and we're going to pass those props to that component. So we have a raw data and then the raw map. And we're going to do the same for the render hidden item function. And this one is going to return a component called hidden item with actions. So let's add our functions to the props. Render item, render hidden item. Now let's create our visible item and hidden item with action components. So as I mentioned, they're responsible for rendering the content of the front row and the back row, and also they can react to changes in the swipe state and activate certain actions. For example, expanding the delete button to full width. For simplicity's sake, we're going to create those components here in our app.js file. So we're going to create a visible item component that takes some props. We're going to have a look later which props we're actually going to need, but for now let's just destructure the data prop. And this item is going to return a view, and the view is going to contain a text component, which is simply going to output the text for that item we added here. We can access that by going to data.item.text. So we're going to add some styles to the view. It's going to take multiple styles, so we're going to add them in an array. I'm going to add those styles a bit later. I'm just going to declare them right now. So this one is going to be called row front, and we're going to add some inline styles, set the height of 60, which we're probably going to change later, but let's just set it for now. And we're going to do the same for the hidden item with actions component. Take some props. So this package gives us access to additional props which can help us with the UI. And again, I'm going to go in further detail discussing those later in the video, but let's just extract them for now. So we're going to get right action activated value, swipe animated value and the data prop that we passed ourselves. So this component needs to return a view again with a style of styles.row back, and it's also going to return two buttons. So we're going to wrap those buttons in a touchable without feedback component. We'll set an onPress prop as a placeholder, which is simply going to say that the button has been touched. So we're going to wrap each button inside the view and declare multiple styles. If you don't like the naming convention, you can go with anything you like. And we're going to also set the width of each button initially to 60. So here I have a misspelling, it's spelled width. So we're going to add some text and an icon for each button. And I'll be using an icons package called React Native EVA icons. So let's go ahead and install the package. As you can see here, this package has another dependency, so we need to install a React Native SVG as well. So let's open this in another tab too. Let's install this one first. Go back to the terminal, npm install package name. And we need to install the pods as well. npx pod install. And there isn't any additional setup with this package, so we can close this down and copy the installation command for EVA icons. All right, let's import our library. All right, looks like we had a dependency issue here with the installation. So it looks like EVA icons is using an older version of React, 16.5. I've installed the project using the latest version of React Native, 0.64, which is using React 17.0.1. So here you can see in the error message, they're actually suggesting the option to use a force flag or a legacy peer dependencies flag. So I recommend against using that because it might lead into version conflicts, but right now we just want to get it working, so let's just go ahead and do that. So we're going to run the same command, but we're going to add the legacy peer dependencies flag. So legacy peer, and voila, we have successfully installed the package. So let's go back to the package instructions and see how we can actually add an icon. So you can see here we can just add a name property for the type of icon that we want, and we can define a color with the fill property. So it's very straightforward. So let's just copy and paste this. So we're going to wrap our text and icon inside another view. So we're going to copy and paste the icon here. So this would be the icon for our placeholder button next to the delete button. So we're just going to add an icon called arrow back outline, and we're going to make the icon white and define a width of 26 as well as a height of 26. So we're going to add some text. Simply going to say right, add some styles. And we actually need to import our text component here. Sometimes VS Code might auto-import components, sometimes it doesn't quite get it right. And we're going to do the same for our main delete button. So we're going to copy and paste this whole section, and we're just going to adjust some of the values. So we need to change some of the styles, and we need to also change the icon. This one is going to be called trash to outline, and the delete button is going to say delete, of course. So I've realized I've made a couple of mistakes, so let's go ahead and actually fix those. So first of all, this prop is not called swap animated, but swap animated value. Also, as you can see here in the iOS simulator, we're getting a render error. So it's saying that the hidden item with actions component is actually not returning anything. So that's because for both visible item and the hidden item, we haven't actually returned the JSX. So we're going to wrap it with a return statement. Do the same here. This error has now disappeared, although we're getting something related to the SVG package, so I'll have a look at that shortly. Let's just copy and paste some of the styles in the styles object that we declared here for the rows. So I'm not going to go over those styles. You can just pause here and just have a look at them. I'm also going to add a colors constant that includes some of the colors we'll be using throughout this tutorial. So I had to restart my development server because it was stuck on the React Native SVG library install. A lot of the time when you run poly install, you might have to just restart the whole thing, and that seems to fix the problem. All right, and we're still not getting any content being rendered. There's one final issue here. When I was generating the dummy data, I've added an extra pair of brackets, just created nested arrays, which we don't need. And if we save this, we can finally see our list. So we can swipe from the right to the left. And as you can see here, our buttons are not fully visible. That's because we've defined a right open value of -75. If you change that to -120, they should be perfectly visible. That's because each button is 60 pixels wide. So when you combine both, you get -120. So this value is always going to be negative since we're translating the front row to the left. Okay, so we need to configure our swipe list view further in order to have it behave the way that we want. So I'm going to first remove the left open value because we're going to disable the swipe from left to right because we don't really need it. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to copy and paste some additional properties, and I'm going to explain what each one of them is for. But before I do, I'm going to quickly declare a screen width variable, which will be equal to the width of the screen, and some placeholder functions in order to avoid getting errors on save. So we're going to go and add the use window dimensions API, and we're going to create a new variable. down here, which is going to be equal to the width of the window screen. All right, and spelling error. And we're also going to define two functions on write action status change. Just console log something. And also swipe gesture ended. So now we can have a look at those props. So the disable right swipe, that one's pretty self-explanatory. As I mentioned, we're going to disable the ability to swipe from the left to the right. Stop right swipe. This is a value which prevents us from swiping any further. So if you can see here, like I can't swipe any further to the left. I just released the row, so that's why that happened. Then the right activation value is just a threshold that once the swipe value surpasses that threshold, it triggers the on write action status change, so you can run some code there. And it also activates our write action activated, which is basically this prop that we passed earlier to the hidden item with actions. So this one will become true if we surpass that write action value. The write activation value. And then the write action value, we're setting that to the width of the screen, but we're setting it as a negative value. So once we swipe past the write activation value and we release the gesture, the front row will be shifted across the x-axis to this value. So we're basically just removing it from the viewport. So this one, the on write action status change, as I mentioned, you can just run some code there. We actually don't need it, but I've realized that if I don't include it here as an empty placeholder function, I'm getting some errors, so I'm just putting it there to avoid that. And then we have the swipe gesture ended prop, which takes a function which gets called once the gesture is released. And again, we're going to use it to run some follow-up animations after the row has actually been deleted. We have two more props here, swipe to open % and swipe to close %, which is how much of the write open value needs to be exceeded in order for the row to open. So it will open as long as around this much of the row has been swiped, and it's going to do the same when you're closing it, which is it just feels nicer that you don't really need to swipe until the end to actually open the row. And we also need to declare use native driver prop as false, because we will be animating some values like the height, which are layout properties, and those can be animated using the native driver, so we're going to get errors if we don't declare this here. So as you can see, currently our action buttons are static. They don't really animate in and out of the view. So in order to animate the row and the buttons, we're going to have to do a refactor of the visible item and hidden item with actions components and wrap some of the content with animatable components. And we're going to create a list to store and track all of the animated values for each row. So we'll be animating two properties, the height of the row and the width of the delete button. So let's go ahead and import the animated API. And then up here, we're going to create a new object We're going to call it row animated values. So we're going to create a new array, use the fill method to fill each item of this array with a static value, and then we're going to loop over each element using the for each method, and we're going to add an animated value for the height and the width of the button for each row to the row animated values object. Sorry, this should be plural. I'm going to use the index as a key to be able to access those animated values later. So we're going to name this row height. It's going to be equal to a new animated value. We're going to set this to 60, which is just the initial height of the row. And then we're going to call this delete button width, and we'll set it to a value of 100. Here, as you recall, we set the initial width of those buttons to 60, but now that we're animating them and they need to be more elastic and expand and contract, we're actually going to set that to a bigger width, and I'll show you later why. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the refactor. So we're going to turn the visible item view container to an animated view. And we're going to change the value of the height property from a static value to be equal to the animated value that we defined here. So we're going to access this, and we're going to need the key for this row, which is equal to the index of the row. So we're going to get that by accessing data.item.key, and we're going to get the object value that we need by accessing the property, and then we'll get the row height. So we need to do the same with the hidden item with actions component. We're going to extract the row key, and we're going to convert each button view to an animated view. The right button, and then for the delete button. We're going to change the width of the placeholder button to 100, and we're going to change the width of the delete button to be equal to the animated value we're storing in the row animated values object. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, and this needs to be equal to the delete button width. It's an extra curly bracket. Okay, so now in order to animate the buttons coming in and out of the view in the way that we had in the demo, we're going to play around with the transform translate X property of each button. And basically how this is going to work is we're going to place both buttons at the same position outside of the viewport when the row is closed, and the moment that we start swiping the front row open, it's going to track this swipe animated value prop that is made available to us, and we're going to adjust the translate X value of each button to follow that, so that the buttons shift to the left. And because they start from the same position, but they end up in different positions, right? The left button is further to the left than the right button. Then that means that the left button needs to move actually faster to get there. So that creates this effect of kind of like what we have in the demo. So we're going to add a translate X property, and we're going to set it equal to the swipe animated value, and we're going to interpolate that to basically map some input ranges to some output ranges. So we're going to add an array of input ranges. The exact values are -200, -120, and 0, and the output range for the left button would be -100, -20, and 100. That means that when the swipe animated value is at 0, so when it's closed, our left button would be at a translate X value of 100, because the positioning of that container is absolute and is set to 0. That means that it's actually going to be shifted 100 pixels to the right and will be outside of the viewport. And when the row begins being swiped to the left and reaches 120 pixels, then our button would be would transition to translate X values -20, which means that part of it would actually start showing up, and when it reaches a value of the swipe reaches a value of -200, then our button would be fully visible. So again, let's do the same with the delete button. So we need to, let's just copy and paste this thing. Also, we need to clamp the extrapolation because we don't want the animation to go beyond the values that we define. So we're going to just set extrapolate equal to clamp. Okay, and let's do the same like I mentioned with the delete button. That's right here. So we have in the output range, and that's what I'm getting there. Output range, output range. All right, let's just fix it. And then 0, 40, and 100. All right. And let's apply some changes to the styles. So we need to basically do some flex alignment to position the content inside the back row in a way that we want it to. Set the flex direction to row and justify content to space between. And we actually need to set a background color, I think, to the back row. So let's set that to white. And then we're going to add some styles for the back right button style. So we're going to set both buttons to an initial position of right equal to 0. And we're going to set some alignment here as well. Like start, and add a little bit of padding from the left side of the button. It's going to be equal to 12. And that should do the trick. Let's have a look now. See what's happening. All right, so I think we're almost there. But left button looks messed up. All right, I had to actually remove the right equal to 60 value that we had initially set up. And perfect. Now it's actually working just fine. So as I mentioned, so those buttons here right now, they start at a right value of 0 and they're shifted along the x-axis 100 pixels to the right. But the moment we start opening the row and they start animating the translate x value, and they are animated to reach the values that we defined here in the output range. So the left button looks like it's animating faster than the right button because it needs to travel a longer distance to get there. So now we're going to work on creating that effect where once you surpass the threshold, the delete button width is going to be animated to extend to the full width of the row. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to make use of this right action activated prop. So basically, once we reach the activation value, this value is going to turn to true. So if this happens, we're going to use the animated timing method to animate the width of the button. So we're going to basically pass that value here as the first argument, button width, and then we're going to add some configuration. We're going to basically make the width go to the value of to the swipe animated value. So right now it's swiped around 200 pixels, so we're going to set the width to reach those 200 pixels. We're going to access that value by accessing the swiped animated value, but because this is the animated value and we actually need to get access to an integer, we're going to actually use a get value method. Now this feels a bit hacky, to be honest with you, so if you know of a better way to access that value, just let me know. And since this is going to be a negative value, but we're going to need a positive value for the width, we're just going to use the math absolute method just to turn that into an absolute value. And we're going to set a duration for an animation of 250 and set the use native driver to false. Again, as I mentioned, if we're animating layout properties, your entire animation chain needs to disable the native driver. It doesn't matter if at some point you're animating a property that can actually be animated using the native driver, like your whole chain needs to be running on the JavaScript thread. And we're going to start our animation, and then if the user decides to swipe back without releasing the gesture and the right action activated becomes false again, we're going to animate the button back to its initial width. So we're going to set it to 100, to what it was initially. And yeah, that should be it. So now you can see if we reach the threshold, it animates, and if we go back, it goes back to its initial width. One of the final things we need to do is to actually define some animations that are going to run when the swipe gesture is released. So we'll go back to the function that we declared in the beginning, the swipe gesture ended. So this function takes two arguments, which is the row key and some other values contained within the data prop. So one of those values is the translate x value of the front row when the gesture is released. So in our case, the row had moved 200 pixels when we release it. So we're going to be looking for that. So we're going to say that if the translate x value of the row was smaller than minus 200 pixels, remember translation to the left results in negative values, we're going to animate the delete button to reach the full width of the row, and then we're going to animate the height to 0 so that it creates the illusion of the row disappearing. Yeah, so we're going to first run the button with animation. So again, we're going to use the timing method of the animated API. We're going to get access to the delete button width. We're going to set this width to be equal now to the whole width of the screen. And again, we're going to give it 200 milliseconds to run and disable the native driver. And then we're going to run another animation for the row height. And we're going to animate it to 0 and give it a slight delay of 200 milliseconds just to let the width animation run before we animate the height. And let's see what we get. So we're expanding, and we're releasing, and it goes until the end. So as you can see, there's some weirdness going on here. Once we delete the row, there's like some remains, like a thin line left over. So this is because we are running the animation for the width of the button and the height of the row, but we're not actually removing the item from the list. So this is what we actually need to do. And thankfully, the timing method also accepts a callback once the animation has already run. And what we can do here is we can actually run some code to remove the item from the list. So we're going to use the filter method to remove that list. So we're going to create a new variable, and we're going to filter through the list, and we're going to remove the item with a key property which is equal to the row key that we pass here to the swipe gesture ended function. And then we're going to use our setter function to set the new list. Simple as that. All right. So now if we delete the value, it disappears completely. All right, so we're almost there, but now for the final touch, for the cherry on top, we're actually going to add some haptic feedback the moment we reach the activation threshold, which is simply we're going to use the vibration of the device to give additional feedback to the user to warn them that something important is taking place. So we're going to use a package called React Native Haptic Feedback. So we're going to quickly install the package. We're going to link the library, and we're going to import it. Here at the top, we're going to copy and paste the options that we need. I don't know, put this in here. And then we're going to trigger this feedback using the impact light option. And we're going to trigger that right here when the action has been activated. So obviously you can't really test that on an emulator or a simulator, so you need to actually run the example on the real device to see it. But WhatsApp and many other apps offer haptic feedback in their swipe to delete features. So I thought it's pretty cool, pretty nice. So why not? It's an easy implementation. All right, so that was it. It was really fun. and exhausting at the same time. I hope you guys enjoy it. I really hope that you learned something from it. If you did, please make sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Twitter at StoyanGarov90, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!